Welcome to Hispanic Biz, Stories of Success. I'm Homero Galicia. In this program, we interview business owners who built successful businesses to learn from them, their story, the story of their struggles and their victories, their triumphs, in the expectation that you find these stories interesting and perhaps inspirational, especially today. You will be inspired and interested today. We have a very special guest, a gentleman who I've known for a few years, who's built a very, very important company in El Paso, an engineer, Mr. Hector Holguin. Thank you, Mr. Holguin, for your time.
Thank you, Homero.
Thank you. Mr. Holguin is an El Paso boy, and you were born in El Paso and went to schools in El Paso, right?
Well, I like to think I have one foot in Juarez because both my parents were born in Chihuahua, and with the revolution, some of them actually moved to Juarez. So I grew up with grandparents and uncles and cousins in Juarez, but we actually moved to El Paso, and I went to grammar school and high school here in El Paso.
And you went to El Paso High.
Correct, right.
And after El Paso High, where did you go to school?
Well, I went to, at that time it went from College of Mines to Texas Western to, of course, University of Texas at El Paso. So I went ahead and got my Bachelor of Science degree in Civil Engineering from UTEP, and then I went on and got a Master's degree in Structural Engineering from the University of Texas at Austin. That was in 1959. Okay.
Your family, how many brothers and sisters?
I have one brother, Ricardo, and I have a sister. He couldn't say BB. I mean, he couldn't say baby when she was born, so she's been BB ever since. So Ana Maria BB Holguin is my sister.
What did you learn from your father?
Well, I'm blessed because I had a wonderful father. His greatest treasure was not that he made money. You know, he was an automobile salesman all his life, all his professional life. He started with Lone Star Motor Company. And at that time, you could only sell used cars. They wouldn't have a Mexican or Mexican-American selling new cars. So he started selling, and I'm talking about the 40s, And so he went up through Lone Star. Then he moved to downtown, which was Watkins, which eventually was bought by Rudolph Chevrolet. And Mr. Neeson, of course, started Rudolph Chevrolet, and of course his son now is taking that over. So my father had a 50-year career in automobile sales. But I like to say he was totally honest. He was. I could go there. My mother would take us there because he worked so many long hours, and people would wait for him for hours. I'm talking about the ranchers from the lower valley, the upper valley, would wait to buy the next car from him because they trusted him. So for generations, you have people even come to me today and say, "We bought our first car and every car thereafter from your father." So I'm proud of, he's a very quiet individual, very, I think very dignified, and you could gravitate to his honesty and his sincerity. So I hope that I patterned some of my life after him.
And your mother, what was your mother like?
Well, my mother's Antonia Medina. The Medina family is very well known, and of course, they came from Chihuahua, but then in Juarez, there's 5 sisters, and my tío Fausto. Fausto Medina started a store. He with the revolution, they lost everything in the city of Chihuahua. He moved to Juarez and started a small little store that eventually became Casa Medina. And he really, the business grew when he decided he could distribute Mexican tile into the U.S. market. Let's say the tile from Monterrey. So every home that was built in the 40s and 50s, in the United States, that Mexican tile probably came from my grandfather's store in Juarez, Wow. So he was the entrepreneur. I guess I get my, a certain style from my father, and then I could see my grandfather being very entrepreneur. He also founded the Red Cross in Juarez, which is where I had my first sort of ties to my wife Rosario, because she was very active in doing, volunteer work for the Red Cross.
Where did you meet your wife?
Well, growing up, I found it was more fun to go to the tardeadas and weddings and festivals in Juarez. There's always something to do, so I would go there with my cousins. And I remember my wife at her 15-year-old coming out party, but I was a little too old, for her. So, but I just remember seeing her at that time, and it was years later that I actually, made contact again. Okay.
Okay. So you finished Texas Western, or did you graduate from UTEP?
It was Texas Western.
Okay.
Right.
So you graduated around, what, 60?
Well, no, I graduated in 1958.
Okay. So now you're a graduate engineer. Did you go to graduate school after that, or did you go to work after?
Well, that's where someone sort of, that's where Miss Destiny comes in. Okay, I wasn't planning on going to graduate school. In fact, I had to go in the military. I served in ROTC, and at that time there was no conflict, so I had to choose between serving 6 months or 2 years. Because I wanted to be a professional engineer, I chose the 6-year path. So my next door neighbor was Dr. Rentelin. He taught metallurgy, a wonderful teacher. And one day he grabbed me and said, where are you going? I mean, well, I need to go in the military. He said, why don't you go to graduate school first? Well, I don't think they'll let me take a leave. No, I'll work on it. So he got me into UT Austin. And thanks to him, I mean, that was a very important passage in my life, because that sort of allowed me to do certain things that I couldn't have done if I didn't have a master's degree.
When did you know you wanted to be an engineer?
Well, I really wanted to be an architect, but there wasn't an architectural school here, and at that time I couldn't really afford to think about going out of town. I had a cousin from Parral that became an architectural engineer, and he went to Austin. So I thought, well, maybe I'd start here in civil engineering and then maybe, get an advanced degree in architecture. And then I have another uncle, in fact, from my father's side, Juan Holguin, that graduated from Texas College of Mines. Now, that's very important historically, because his great uncle was named Juan, and he founded a mine in Tarahumara country with my great grandfather, and my great grandfather died at an early age. So my grandfather decided to name my name Juan. So he was going to carry the tradition of the mining, and became a mining engineer. And he founded some of the mines in Mexico. The most famous one being Nica, where you have these wonderful croppings, And make a long story short, he actually, towards the end of his career, he became director of all operations for ASARCO in Mexico.
Wow.
So you can see I had two sides of the family and I love math, so as a way of I think, gravitating to an engineering career.
So it's not foreign to you to think about engineering at all?
No, it was like I say, I think Dr. Rentelin is the one that
Okay. Okay.
You will do this. Okay, someone sometimes has to tell you that,
So you finish at Austin with your master's, and then what's next?
Well, I served the 6 months in the military. Then once you do that, you have to serve so many years in the reserves. But that's when I knew that El Paso didn't really have much to offer. That even today, a lot of our graduates, engineering graduates, have to leave town. Okay, and so I started exploring, and I went to work at the Douglas Space Systems Center in Huntington Beach, California. And so this is the beginning of the major Saturn program, and Douglas had the second stage. The first stage is a monster, the one that has to, that's so many stories high, and that the payload has to carry the Saturn mission, the Apollo mission, up into orbit. Well, we had the second stage, which is much more interesting, because basically the second stage takes it from once it separates, it goes into to Earth orbit. Okay, then the engines have to ignite again and go from Earth orbit to the passages to the moon. So that was a much more interesting, the work there. I started working the design section, and I would design a lot of widgets. You know, it wasn't, after a while, it wasn't really that interesting, you know, but from the standpoint that, you know, you look around and you see a big IBM computer hidden in a room, you see engineers working on terminals. I said, well, so I started looking around and a position opened in the test lab. And so I moved over to the test laboratory as an engineer. And the rest of my career at the Space Systems Center was in that test lab.
How long did you work for them?
I was there from 1960-61 to 1966.
Okay, so
5 years.
5 years.
Yeah.
And what year did you get married in?
Well, it took 2 years to court my wife. You know, we sort of dated in Juarez, and then I think the timing wasn't right for us. She moved to Mexico City, and that's when I moved to California, and we didn't see each other for 2 years. So. Again, you know, Miss Destiny knocks, and and we got together, and we got married in '64, and we moved to California. So Huntington Beach is just outside of Long Beach, and we lived in a small little community, just which was very nice, Belmont Shores. So it was a very nice way to begin a marriage, independent, and wouldn't hesitate to have visitors. People love to go to that part of the country.
Yeah. So you worked there 6 years in the missile area, in the testing area. So what's the next step for you?
Well, to me, that's where I learned to use a computer. You know, if I was in the design section, they introduced these terminals, and I would go in there and learn how to program. But you just program very simple programs, you know, on paper tape, and then you run it. And then I had to create some computer models, but what you do with that, you fill out forms, and the forms go to this big room somewhere, and magically, you know, they produce what you want. And the computer at that time was just had to be huge, you know. So my interaction with computers was more intimate with a terminal than it was filling out forms to create a computer model. But moving over to the test lab was more important. Again, I was working on some smaller projects. Then I guess fate caused an accident, and all of a sudden they wanted to replace the engineer, and they asked me if I would step into that role. And this was the largest test program at that time, which is a 2-year test program for the second stage, and it was for the thrust structure, which is where the engines mount. So it's a very complex test, because you had to simulate all of the motions to get from, to get to Earth orbit and then ignite and then go to lunar orbit. So it was a very complex 2-year passage. But if that accident hadn't occurred, I was a young kid on the block. And I remember when they knocked on my door and asked me if I'd do it, I could have easily said, "What?" And something told me, no, I thought, yes, I'll do it, and most of us didn't know what we were doing. It was more of a, you had to be practical. You had people that were very well prepared, preparing all the parameters. But as far as getting in there and getting the total project and getting people to work on something that took 2 years to achieve. And remember, there's 400,000 people around the country doing the same thing on this program. It was a massive program.
So you asked to be the lead engineer of the test lab?
Yeah, so I became the project engineer for this major project.
Wow.
It took 2 years to certify this structure.
So you were selected over people from all these big schools in the country?
Yeah, I think certainly having the master's degree helped me, but there are people that are from MIT and from Stanford and Berkeley and so on. And I guess I learned to be practical, and I learned if someone gave me a job, I just knew that I had to get it done, and people could rely on that. And I think that helped me, get this particular project.
Did you ever have a issue with confidence?
Well, I think I learned early on that fear can paralyze you, right? I mean, if you're afraid of something, it just paralyzes you. And there's always moments that, especially being an entrepreneur, but I always treat it like a shadow on the wall. I know it's there, I respect it, but I will not let it consume me. I will not let it consume my spirit. So that's very important, because if you accept those kind of challenges, and fear is there, basically the greater the challenge, the greater the opportunity. So you learn that fear is just a mechanism that's going to either work with you or against you.
Wow. So you're lead engineer, and you finished that project. You did the 2-year test, and
yeah, we had a very successful project. They wanted me to stay on, and at that time they were thinking of the Sky Laboratory, and at that time I was married. We had our first daughter in Long Beach, which is Rosario, my oldest daughter. And I said, you know what, it's time for me to go back. If we don't go back now, it's going to be very difficult, because I love this work, and the Skylab thing is going to consume everybody for the next number of years. So I decided it was time to pick up and leave, not knowing that because of the Vietnam War, Lyndon Johnson killed the Skylab project, and where they had 400,000 people working. Like in our facility, we had 4,000 engineers, and designers. And in our lab, there was not that many, but we had, let's say, maybe 36 people. So we had, it was a smaller group. But in the building, the main building, we had 4,000 people. Well, within a stroke of a pen, most of those lost their jobs.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so we lost a tremendous opportunity as a nation, because there's a serious void there that didn't rekindle itself until we went back to finally, we do have a lab working in space, but that should have happened 10 years before.
But you'd already decided to.
Yeah, I decided to leave and come back. I think the main motivation is that I grew up. I'm very Mexican in soul and what I love, and the music, the tapestry, the celebration of the family. And then, I step across the river and I'm very American, because I know what this country offers, and the free enterprise system, it's unequal anywhere. So you might say that you learn to appreciate that. I wanted my daughters to grow up being very Mexican. I wanted them to understand the importance of the tradition and cultures. Well, the only way to do that is to come back here. And yes, for all the first years, them growing up, all their birthdays, all of our entertainment was always in Juarez, and of course, relatives here in El Paso.
So you come back to El Paso. How many children did you have?
Well, we came back, and my wife announced to me a few weeks later that we're having our second daughter, Mara Isabel, and I didn't have a job, So here I'd left a wonderful job, and I thought I had plenty of time, to look around, and I was thinking of actually starting something on my own at that time. Also, I have the pressure of saying, whoops, thankfully we had the insurance from my work in aerospace that would cover the expenses and so on. But it did put pressure on me to go ahead and start looking for something that could, provide for the family. So Mara was born on July the 4th. She's been a firecracker ever since. That's and then I have 2 more daughters. Lilia Marcela, we call her Lili, and Ana Elisa. And so I'm blessed with 4 daughters.
Wow, fantastic. So you find a job in El Paso.
Well, again, remember I talk about Miss Destiny, and and I always say she's wicked and wily. I saw Miss Destiny because she knocks on your door when you least expect it. I get a call from a young friend, Bob Whitus, that I'd worked in the summer at a company called Smith and Cremens, and he found out I was in town, and he calls me and said, "Hector, we've got a position here. We'd like for you to consider it." Well, this is a civil engineering firm. I've been in aerospace for 5 years, And I said, I don't see how I can do that. Well, why don't you talk to Mr. Cremens? At that time, he had separated and formed Cremens Incorporated. And he was the largest civil engineering firm in El Paso. There weren't too many. And he had the airport, all the work at the airport, had most of the subdivisions, all of Cielo Vista. There's nothing there. At that time, I'm talking about 1966, 1967. So Cielo Vista was not there. It was all desert, and so you had the airport, and then it was all dirt. Well, to make a long story short, we actually developed all of Cielo Vista. Okay, and we developed Horizon City, and we developed most of the major land developments in that period of. I was with him from 1966 to 1972. That's 6 years. Okay.
So when you say develop, what do you mean?
Well, when he interviewed me, I was honest with him. I said, I did work for you a summer. I do know coordinate geometry, but I don't know. He said, that's all right. You know computers, and I think we've got some projects coming, and I'm intrigued by what we can do with a computer. So that's what started it. I went ahead and at that time it was something being sold at a local architectural, store, a small little computer that you program. But you could program it in chunks, in 2K chunks, 2,000 characters. When you talk about a megabyte, I don't even know what that is even today. I mean, I start with 2K, 8K, 16K, which is 16,000, and 64. I thought that had the world by the hand. So we started with a very small computer, but I learned to program, which I learned to program in aerospace. So I programmed and learned and did an earthwork package and a coordinate geometry package, and so basically I learned a very important lesson. I did it, and I put a lot of fancy whistles and bells on it, and I went out to show my work to the people there, and I thought everybody would gravitate to it. Nobody would use it, nobody would use it. It's the right way you learn a lesson. Keep it simple. The more simpler it is, the more powerful it is. So then you go ahead and develop. Everything I did from then on becomes very compact, very modular, and you design it for people that are afraid of computers. At that time, there's no computers in the workplace, so other than the very huge mainframes. So we learned through that experience that you have to apply it where people that are typically doing it by hand, like draftsmen and designers, can actually make that transition very, very quickly and gain productivity in months and not, or even in weeks.
So you started programming to do the drafting.
Right. Now, because of all of a sudden we had the contract to do Horizon City and Cielo Vista, so we knew that we had to put out thousands of lots in land development every week. I'm not talking about every month. I'm talking about, just to let you know, we were pumping out on an IBM 1130, which is a mini computer. We were pumping out 6,000 lots a week. Okay, that means you got draftsmen, let's say 12 draftsmen turning out plats every day, but the everything was being designed with a computer. But at that time, the IBM 1130 worked on a card system. God forbid if you dropped the cards, okay, because it's a box of cards, and then you fed it into a machine, and that's how you did your programming, and that's how you process the work. So we had greatly automated the operation because we were pumping out 6,000 lots a week, and we were doing it with I'd say probably 12 people, and our competitors didn't even come close to that. And at that time, of course, the only way you could do computer-aided design in civil engineering design, land development, was on a very large mainframe that would cost $250,000 a seat. And here we were talking about getting something down that could be used in a small, medium-sized consulting firm, and which is what we did.
So that's what you did. You.
Well, I became vice president of operations, and in the first year. And then he gave me the ability to manage all of the operations, including the field work. But he had to be pretty understanding, and that this young aerospace brat would come in and try to change the status quo. One time I'll never forget, I would work on weekends sometimes, and one time I didn't know, I was sprawled on the floor with all the records, all the files, and what I was doing is weeding out the stuff that we couldn't use. I mean, there's a gold mine in all the filing cabinets, but no one could use it because there's so much junk there. So I would take Saturdays, spend a few hours, and take stuff out and throw it away or put it away. He came in and saw me what I was doing, and his eyes, very seldom would his eyes get narrow, and so I knew I was in trouble. He said, well, I better not lose anything that's valuable. So I'm no dummy. Whatever I threw away, I put in my garage for, for a year to make sure that that wasn't needed. So, but I did streamline the whole. What you need to understand that it's people, process, and so it's not just computers. You need to impact the whole, everything that touches the design or the drafting and so on. So the by making the information, the libraries lean, and making the ability for